With the Labour Party, policymakers searching for policies are now adopting the Just Stop Oil policy of no more exploration for gas or oil. I suppose you may wonder if we are being led by donkeys. But we're not. No, because that would be an insult to donkeys. This video explores the stupid policies of both Labour and Conservative, in fact, of all the mainstream parties. Well, welcome to another episode. Well, this one sort of sparked off when I watched an interview on GB News on the Farage show with a Labour activist on the climate, and it's announced on the day that Labour have done the big announcement on its new green energy policy, which is so stupid, it is really beyond belief. And so I just want to pretend I'm doing the interview with this person from Labour who is very excited about their new policy, which will just about cripple the UK economy, of course. So here we go. But first of all, what I want to look at is in this month of June that we're in now. I just want to go back a bit. Look at the last number of days in June, the weather here, and where our energy has come from. Now, if you come along to here, you can see that the wind, the green part, has dropped to next to nothing. And we're getting our energy from the blue part, gas, and of course the solar part now is none because it's night time. And by the way, the efficiency of the solar panels in this hot weather has decreased quite a lot. But we're also getting it from imports, which is that bottom colour there. So without the imports and the gas, well, that's it. There is the base load we've got of nuclear and so on. But without that gas to respond to the lack of wind and solar, we'd be up the creek without a paddle. Let's go along further and just see again. And now look at here. Again, hardly any wind. So where's the energy coming from? What they will tell you is storage that doesn't exist. And I've already done a video on this. I'll link it in the description below this one, showing, that in one 9-day period we had a shortage of 7,200 gigawatts, and there is no system anywhere that can cope with these storage requirements. It's all absolute conjecture. But, having given you that bit of background, let's now look at what Labour would do. They want to build on-land wind farms. They want to treble them. So let's go back to that point here on the graph and look. What happens if we treble next to nothing? Well, the answer is we get next to nothing. So trebling just costs an enormous amount of money. And by the way, wind is very expensive. The countries with the most wind per capita are actually have the most expensive electricity. It is a complete lie that wind power is cheap. That is a complete distortion of the basic facts. The government are now introducing the green levy. They suspended this for 2 years, about 9 months ago. I've changed their mind and are now putting it back on your bills. That's £170 per household per year. In addition, they had a green hydrogen levy planned, which was round about £118 a year per household. But even though they're stupid, they have decided to withhold that a bit. But it's still going to happen. It's called a hydrogen subsidy. So this subsidy, which you're still going to be paying for, they haven't withdrawn it, they've just hidden it, is supporting 10 gigawatt of low-carbon hydrogen production and could cost $53 billion over the next 23 years, which would mean that the financial support for the hydrogen industry will rise to $3.5 billion per year by 2030. But you're being told green energy is cheap. It's cheaper. Look at all these subsidies, and these are only some of the visible ones. There are really big ones that are hidden deeper. And the whole basis of that deserves a separate video, which I am doing. But these green levies, plus many other costs that you can't see, such as the cost of having to balance. I'll give you one example of an extreme cost. Because they can't use the efficient closed-circuit gas stations to quickly respond, they can't quickly respond, but they use a lot less gas. So they choose to have open circuit gas stations because they can respond quickly to the wind, and they use 50% more gas, 50% more cost to you, and 50% more CO2. You couldn't make up this madness. Children could do better than this. The whole system, the system of distribution, etc., is being, well, havoc is being caused, and extra costs are being caused, which they don't count. So they don't count all those extra costs. And of course, why would they be asking for green subsidies at all if, as they're telling you, green energy is much cheaper? Well, it isn't. And in fact, we need to look at this. The cost that's being placed on you is causing inflation. And then the government basically tax you on that inflation by imposing higher interest rates. But they're causing the higher interest rates. So they're pushing the costs. It's called cost push inflation. And you do not control cost plus inflation with interest rates, because it's not the public that are overspending. It's the costs that are increasing. Over time, cost plus will naturally force its way through, we hope. But the government's reaction to all this is like a child again on the economic front. It is absolutely ridiculous. But let's get on with the story.
Now, Keir Starmer today, a big speech in Edinburgh in which he pledged to throw everything at net zero. Yup. And he's going to fire the starting gun on a race for us to build more onshore wind turbines.
Well, that's a bit of a flip. It wasn't just too long ago that Keir Starmer was promising to quadruple offshore wind power. Of course, what's happened is some reality's dawned on the cost of offshore and the refusal of companies to actually go into it, because when they rushed into it, because we're the biggest offshore people in the world, they found the costs were way past what they expected. This is just one report. A string of offshore wind projects meant to power Britain are in jeopardy after the global race to net zero sent costs soaring, casting doubt over the industry's future as a cheap source of energy. A surge in supply chain costs has pushed up the price of wind turbines, whilst increases in global interest rates have raised refinancing costs substantially. It has made several projects unviable just a year after they won the government's subsidy contracts. Note that, by the way, subsidy contracts. So the subsidy right in it from the beginning, leading to fears from industry insiders that Britain's future is in jeopardy as the Saudi Arabia of wind. That, of course, was Boris Johnson's promise, that we'd be the Saudi Arabia of wind. So now the children governing us, the idiots governing us, switch over to onshore. But that is no better. So whilst the lie about cheap renewable energy is being peddled to you all the time, the report here from Professor Gordon Hughes of Edinburgh University is maybe telling the truth. The British public is facing a doubling of electricity prices to bail out new wind farms. That's according to Professor Gordon Hughes of Edinburgh University, who has analysed the latest data for wind farms coming on stream in the next few years. Professor Hughes goes on to say, policymakers need to understand that wind farms are going to deliver less power than expected for a shorter time and at a much higher cost. The focus on renewables, and in particular on wind power, must now be seen as a disastrous mistake. We must row back, and quickly. But it is not just me quoting Professor Hughes. You only have to look at the market. Siemens Energy stock prices have dropped to record numbers following growing issues at Siemens Gamesa Renewable Energy. Share prices dropped by as much as 36% after the firm reported a substantial increase in failure rates of wind turbine components. Siemens Energy is saying that it is scrapping its annual profit guidance and has warned shareholders that additional costs may exceed €1 billion. That's £85.68 million. We are facing a wall of debt because of net zero. What you've seen so far is as nothing compared to what's going to happen. And you really have to smell the coffee here, because our government are in a cult. They're just a cult on net zero, a cult without any foundation. And of course, none of what we do, even if we disappeared as a country tomorrow, would make any difference to really the growth of CO2 in the world. As per this graph, there is no difference from all the conferences. CO2 just carries on because the rest of the world, outside the Western world, is ignoring all this and just carrying on powering their industry with more and more coal and fossil fuel. And by the way, they're doing us a favour by increasing the CO2, which overall is beneficial. So now they've flipped. They don't tell you they flipped, they just make a new announcement. So now the new announcement is it's going to be onshore. And that's going to be via compulsory purchase a lot because people aren't going to like it. But let's get back to the story.
Allied to that, no new gas or oil exploration in the North Sea.
Well, it wasn't really a good start to the announcement because the Labour bus travelling to that speech was a hydrogen bus, but it broke down and had to be replaced by a diesel one.
He says his plans have the potential to create jobs across the country and to improve UK's energy security. Well, I have to say that last point I think is complete and utter nonsense. The more we rely on wind, the less energy secure we are. Sean Spears joins me, who is Executive Director of the environmental think tank and charity, the Green Alliance, formerly, some years ago, a Labour MEP. But also, Sean, you were, of course, running the Council for the Protection of Rural England many years ago. I want to put this to you. As somebody who has fought as hard as you have over many, many years to, keep our wonderful green and pleasant land as it ought to be, full of, great biodiverse species, to keep our uplands looking beautiful. Surely, Sean, whatever your green credentials, you must think a huge outbreak of onshore wind farms is bad for the countryside.
Well, Nigel, I love our Bluebell Woods, and we've got to do something about climate change. I think onshore wind in the right place through the planning system. I don't like this gung-ho rip-up planning, but the evidence is that if you work with communities and locate it in the right places, then people actually get behind it, and particularly community ownership of wind farms, rather than somebody saying, I'm the guy from the energy company, you're going to have a wind farm, we're going to make a big profit, like it or lump it. There needs to be a new dialogue on how we get onshore wind.
Well, that all sounds well and good, Sean, but I'm speaking to you from Rochester in Kent. Take the Romney Marshes. A wind farm was put up there a few years ago. Virtually every local councillor, MP, MEP, virtually all apart from one who was a Green, objected to it being built, and local communities don't get behind these, and so what happened was there was a compulsory purchase order. And not only are they ugly aesthetically, but they kill huge numbers of bats, birds, and goodness knows what else. Is this really surely if we wanted a green solution, we would be going for new, smaller types of nuclear energy.
So the question from Nigel Farage there was pretty simple. If we want to be green, why kill, let's say in Germany, for example, a study there, 200,000 bats a year killed by wind farms. In the North Sea of Amsterdam, of Holland there, in one area, they estimate a reduction of 90% in the diving bird population. This is just one example. In other areas, it was as high as 60% reduction. These wind farms devastate nature. And that's just the birds. There's many other factors besides birds. These things are totally dangerous to nature, onshore or offshore. So the question is, if you're interested in nature, etc., and conservation, why go for wind? Why not go for small modular nuclear? And of course, what you'll now see is typical non-answer. The question is not addressed at all.
Well, I think Keir Starmer's speech today is absolutely right. You've got to throw everything at this, and climate change is really, really serious.
No, it's not actually. It's totally fake. There is no evidence for it. And now you alarmists are relying on weather events, something that is not even climate. And not only that, weather events that are so distorted, such as taking the temperature on the runway at Heathrow and then claiming it's high temperatures for a day or an hour. What a meaningless way to present science. You really should be ashamed of yourselves.
You've just had a piece on immigration. One of the drivers of immigration and asylum seeking is, of course, climate change.
That, of course, is simply not true. Climate change is not driving people leaving countries because of climate change and hence immigration. It's not doing that. In fact, throughout the world, because of the extra CO2, we have an enormous amount of extra crop growth. Enormous. Just look at these graphs. Now, the Sahara Desert is actually shrinking. More and more people are able to make a living off the edge of it as it shrinks. It is total opposite to what they are claiming. But again, facts don't matter anymore. What matters are feelings, apparently. This is the new world we're in.
You've got huge investment around the world in the green transition, $370 billion, $1.7 trillion, conceivably up to 1.7 trillion by the US, massive investment in the EU. If the UK is left behind, we not only lose out on our contribution to climate change, where we've been world leaders.
Yes, that is true. Trillions are being spent on net zero madness, and we are supposed to join in with this rush into this mad world. The facts are that in the EU, money is being withdrawn from the green funds non-stop. Countries are simply refusing to join in. The whole green energy budget is now under threat. In Germany, who closed down their nuclear and are now actually having to resort to coal this coming winter and are resurrecting coal power stations. Unlike Germany, who kept the coal power and just decommissioned them, we actually destroyed our coal power stations. We actually had to be more virtuous. We even had to bring it forward to 2030, the green net zero target, instead of 2035. But all of this is crumbling. It's crumbling before our eyes. But we're meant to join in with the crumbling. That's basically what he's saying.
We lose out on all the job opportunities. And I think you can work with communities to get them to back wind farms. The big difference, Nigel, from when I was running CPRE 6 years ago, is there was a lot of stuff there saying that they were very expensive and they didn't work. And almost nobody now thinks that.
I don't know what planet this man is on. You know, that the countries as a table, the countries with the most expensive power are the countries with the most wind power per capita. There we are, there's the table. And I've done a video on this in much more detail, of course. But wind power is extremely expensive, and its intermittent nature can cause massive problems, up to paying 5,000% more to import our power when we need it because the wind's failed, while it's also low for everybody else. So we're paying 50 times or sometimes even 100 times the cost of our energy to import energy when we desperately need it, just to avoid blackouts. So this idea that wind is cheap is ridiculous. If it was cheap, it wouldn't need subsidising. But the facts are, those countries with the most wind power per capita, there's the table again, those countries are the ones with the most expensive electricity. So when he says no one is sort of resisting this, I am.
The evidence is clear. They're the cheapest form of energy, and they make a big contribution.
No, they're subsidised by taxpayers. But moving on from wind, no new oil and gas exploration.
Well, oil and gas is subsidised massively.
Now, that means a huge loss of jobs in Scotland and elsewhere. We will still be using oil and gas probably for several decades to come.
And now we have another Starmer flip. He used to say oil and gas will be a crucial part of the UK's energy supply. But now he's backing Just Stop Oil. But then he's being financed by the Just Stop Oil backer.
And everything that Starmer is doing here, reducing our ability to be self-sufficient, leaving us vulnerable to intermittent wind energy, meaning in short times we have to import electricity from France or from Norway or from Belgium or whatever it is.
Well, that's not the full story. In actual fact, we're needing to import nearly all the time. On this original graph of the recent period, you can see the purple part. That's the imported part, and that is what's coming from Europe at the moment. It's not a reliable supply because they can cut us off as they need the power, and they're in trouble as well. So in this graph, there is more power supplied by imports than in wind in the total period.
I mean, surely his claim that by doing all of these things, he will improve the UK's energy security, surely that is utter rubbish.
Well, if Labour's policy is to decarbonise the grid by 2030, instead of 2035, and it's also to insulate loads of houses, a mass program of insulation. So if they get those things right, then we'll need less imported gas. But
every family in the country has seen over the last couple of years the effects of Tory failure in energy policy. We can't go on like this. That's why Labour has a plan for clean power by 2030. Cheap, homegrown, clean power to cut bills for families across the country, alongside GB Energy, our publicly owned energy company, to deliver for communities across Britain.
So there we have it. That's the Labour plan. The Labour plan to join in with the total madness in the world, having no effect on CO2, by the way. It's negligible, it can't be measured. And of course we need more CO2. The whole basis of this is wrong. But let's have a look now at a recent programme. Whilst I was making this, I happened to dig in on GB News. By the way, GB News in Britain is about the only news channel worth watching now, because it actually does allow a certain amount of debate, although no one seems to be arguing that CO2 is good, which I'd like to see. However, here is an interview between Rees-Mogg and two panellists, and I'll intercept as we go. You'll see what I mean. It really was an enjoyable episode.
In the autumn of last year, when Liz Truss became Prime Minister, a key point of focus was tackling the energy crisis and making utilities cheaper for the public. That's why we lifted the moratorium on fracking to increase energy supply, to drive the price down, and implemented the energy price guarantee, which removed the green levy. As the current Prime Minister took office, he reversed the fracking moratorium, or put it back again, as well as several other pro-growth policies. He did, however, have the goodness to maintain the absence of the green levy, apparently up until now. Over the weekend, it's been reported that the green levy is set to return, which will add about £170 per year to the average energy bill. The Treasury is so embarrassed about this, it won't even answer questions. When we implemented the energy price guarantee, it was designed to cover the green levy, but now that guarantee is due to expire and Ofcom's price cap is lowering, so it seems the levy will be no longer covered. Now, I'm joined by Sam Hall, the director of the Conservative Environment Network. Sam, if we're going to make getting to net zero popular, we can't do it by piling charges onto the British people, can we?
Thanks very much for having me on the show, Jacob. Firstly, I'd just like to give a bit of context for what the green levies actually fund, because I think there are some really important benefits that they have unlocked for us. So, of course, they help us tackle emissions by funding renewable energy projects and insulation projects. They also help tackle fuel poverty by giving out grants to fuel poor households to let them invest in insulation and build discounts.
What's absurd about that, of course, is that the government policy, Conservative, well, the Liberal and Conservative and the Labour, the whole lot, all the mainstream parties, have produced the same policies, basically. There's hardly any difference between them. And Labour's, OK, a bit madder than the Conservatives, but the Conservatives are totally bonkers with their policy. And this Conservative gentleman here is talking about cutting emissions which are good. It's the food of life, CO2. And there's no evidence that the emissions are actually causing any significant and measurable amount of global warming. We haven't been warming now for probably 18 years. And we are actually heading into a cooling period, according to all the natural cycles. So the whole basis of this gentleman, totally sold down the river, totally selling us down the river on this green energy net zero to begin with. His basis is wrong. So all you hear from here on in is just some standard green propaganda. No basic thinking. But Rees-Mogg is actually a bit more sensible than that. We'll see what happens.
And they make us less reliant on energy imports as well. They've enabled us to scale up these homegrown sources of clean energy, making us less reliant on imports from Russia and so on. So I think the things that they've funded have been very valuable. Now, as you said in your introduction, I think there is a question now, as the energy price guarantee expires, as to how we fund the costs of these important schemes in the future. And I would agree that I think there is a strong case, given the continuing high price of energy, to look at funding them out of general taxes rather than putting them back on bills. But I appreciate the Chancellor has a very tight fiscal headroom at the moment, and so that might not be possible.
But we'd have brought down prices more if we'd gone ahead with fracking, which would have provided secure domestic energy, not dependent on Russia, not dependent on LNG coming on, more environmentally friendly than LNG imports. Shouldn't we be doing that to keep the price of energy low so that people don't have to be cold and poor?
Well, I agree that we should be doing what we can to increase the supply of energy and take that supply side approach to bringing down bills. The last government, the Liz Truss government, obviously tried very hard to bring back fracking, and it met with a lot of political resistance. So, I'd query whether that is politically deliverable. I think the other thing we should be doing, though, is building much more wind, solar, nuclear, all the other sources of energy which we know are available. Wind and solar are the cheapest new sources of electricity generation. The prices have fallen significantly thanks to the Conservative government introduced contracts for difference scheme, which has encouraged fierce competition between renewable generators and helped to de-risk private finance to come in and build those projects. So I think we need to get building on all these sources of energy, and we need faster planning decisions and more grid infrastructure as well to help those projects come online sooner.
Well, thank you very much, Sam. Thank you for joining me, and I agree with you. We always need faster planning decisions.
Now for the real fun part. This next part I really enjoyed, and I hope you enjoy it as well. I will stop as normal and make a few comments.
David, £170 a year falls on some of the poorest people in the country. Can this possibly be a sensible thing for the government to restore?
It depends what your value is. So this is the issue of value. If your value is the pursuit of net zero, I'm afraid people will just have to swallow it. It's as simple as that. If we set this as an ideal target, there is no way in which fuel prices can actually be reduced. It's as simple as that.
So, Amy, is it a price worth paying?
Well, I put some figures because I think this makes it really easy to understand. In 2022, 3.2 million people fell into fuel poverty, couldn't afford to pay their bills, whilst Shell made £61,000 a minute.
This lady obviously thinks she's got a scoring point here. Look how much the oil company's making a minute. You know, it's terrible, it's scandalous while people are in poverty. But in actual fact, if you look at the percentage profit Shell made over the last 10 years, say, if you look at the ups and downs that Rees-Mogg is about to point out, their actual profit is 11.2%. And you know what? For any UK profit, the tax on it by this government is 75%, leaving them with just a quarter of the profit. So let's hope they make even more profit in the UK, because those profits are flowing straight into, well, 3/4 of them, flowing straight into government funds. These left-wing idiots who have no understanding how the world works are truly idiots, and I'm fed up with listening to them. And that is what is just about to be pointed out directly to her.
Can I say that again? £61,000 a minute. When you open your bill, when your viewers open your bill, the bill isn't high because of a green tax. It's high because of corporate greed.
But it's
all rubbish. This is silly.
Well, what justifies Shell making £61,000 a minute?
Well,
How do you actually... Right, can we just begin to understand fundamentals? Oil exploration is monstrously expensive.
This isn't profit after that.
yes, but bear in mind, in 2020,
can we gently
hold on just a minute,
explain?
because in 2020, the price of crude oil in the height of
wholesale
COVID,
price?
the price of crude oil, the market price, went below zero. So the oil companies, on every barrel of oil they extracted, actually lost money.
So they're in debt.
They had to pay people. Then the oil price bounced back and the gas price bounced back, and they made profits that recovered this. It's a very cyclical business.
Jacob,
but we wouldn't have any. We wouldn't have any.
Unjustifiable.
We wouldn't have any.
So this silly person is arguing the profits aren't justifiable. Well, let me tell her that people are pulling out of the North Sea. People are pulling out of exploration because the super high 75% tax. And basically, it is not worth the risk. I mean, on what basis is she claiming all these things, except her feelings and her misuse of data?
Oil and gas, if we didn't allow people to make profits, and then we'd have no energy.
Oh no, I would allow profits, of course, but even just a 25% windfall tax.
This is
Why always pass it on to the consumer?
What a stupid thing to say. All costs in business, all the costs are in the end passed on to the consumer. The business has to cover its costs and make a profit. If those costs are increased, then it basically increased all the way through the supply chain to you, the consumer. In the end, the consumer pays it all. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there for charity. They're not there to lose money and give it to you.
Well, this is £170 per bill passed by the government to the consumer.
That's a drop in the ocean.
No, it's not.
The real drop, right. Can we just get the real drop in the ocean? The reason that prices are so high is something completely, electricity prices are so high, is nothing to do actually with directly Shell. It is simply because electricity is priced by what is called net marginal cost. That is the most expensive single unit of generation, governs the price to everybody. This again, you see, you should be asking, why do we have structurally, probably now, I think, the most expensive electricity?
In Europe.
Well, the figures vary virtually from day to day, but we are right up there with Denmark and
Germany.
And with Germany. And if you actually look at America, you look at France, you look at China, their energy costs are a third of ours. Now, this is the result of government decision. This is a deliberate decision to favour renewables.
So, Amy, can I come to...
At last, somebody is speaking total 100% sense and the truth.
David's first point. Because this is a perfectly reasonable view that some people hold. Is it worth paying these prices to get to net zero?
Of course. Since 2001, when these green levies came in, they have done infinite good.
So the £170 a year she calls a drop in the ocean. The green levy has done infinite good. So all these levies, all these green subsidies are fine in her dream world, because she truly lives in a dream world, this woman. That is ridiculous. We have not done an infinite amount of good. We have created hugely high energy prices and started to reverse, in effect, an industrial revolution. What we're doing now is actually damaging our economy every week, every month, every day, every year. We are damaging our economy because of high energy prices, which are fundamental to the entire industrial revolution that we've had. And there is no green revolution coming. What's coming is disaster.
For example, with the programmes of home insulation, which has taken 4 million homes and restricted their ability to even fall into the category they could suffer fuel poverty because it saved them money on their bills. The green tax is a long-term solution. It's not short-term.
So what is a solution? So what is it a solution to? See, this is the problem. Green energy will always be much more expensive.
It's just simply not.
Green energy will always be more expensive because we have no means of storing it. This means you need double the actual power generation capacity. You build enormous redundancy into it, and there is no way you can get around that.
Or do you need more research into how better to store?
Oh, sorry.
But we're not there
In other
yet.
words, this is pie in the sky,
So you just
this is there will be a wonderful, perfect future.
This idea that we've got to do research to find the storage, let's do the research, is ridiculous. Let me give you some idea of the scale of the problem. In the 9 days we had without wind in 2018, as one example, it's not the worst, but just take that, the shortage would have been 7,200 gigawatt hours. There's the figure on the screen, 7,200 gigawatt hours. Today's lithium battery prices, assuming we don't put too much demand to shove up the price, is around about half a million pounds per megawatt. So about £1 million for 2 megawatts. So around about £500 million per gigawatt hour. £500 million per gigawatt hour. And we need 7,200 gigawatt hours, which is 3,600 trillion pounds. Of course, that would be the lower price because, well, there aren't the resources in the world to do it. Now, I know I'm taking battery power, but that's an example. The turnover of the UK, the GDP, is 2.6 trillion or so, and we need 3,600. So it's actually more than the world economy. Let's now take pump storage. I was the water resource engineer for theNet, the biggest pump storage scheme in the UK and the biggest in Europe at the time. 9.1 gigawatt hours. We need 7,200. Let's take the new planned pump storage scheme in Scotland, 30 gigawatt hours. Let's add them together with theNet, 40 gigawatt hours, say. We need 7,200. There is no viable means of doing this. And hydrogen, oh, let's not go into that. I'm doing a separate video on that. It's ridiculous. There is no means of storage. And Starkey is totally correct in everything he said on this program. Totally correct. He may be a historian, but he's an intelligent man who just observes facts and evidence, unlike this lady. She's asking you to risk your entire economy, to risk all your energy things, after, by the way, increasing energy prices for the last 20-odd years on the green mad policies. She's asking you to trust into something that doesn't exist. The storage. And that is the fundamental problem with green energy.
And the problem is, of course, we produce less than 1% of the world's emissions. We are committing economic suicide because silly, naive people like you...
Hold on.
It's true.
Mere abuse won't get anywhere.
I draw issue of being called a silly, naive person.
Let's ignore.
Well, I don't believe Starkey is fully accurate there, saying she's a silly, naive person. I think she's a dangerous, silly, naive person, because she's given a platform to spout this total nonsense and mislead people.
Let's strike that from the record.
Because the evidence is there. This isn't a new tax. This tax has been in since 2001.
I thought we'd both admitted, you yourself said, that the levy is a tiny figure. What I'm trying to do is to explain and to get Jacob to understand too, which I think he does, why overall energy prices are lunatically high in the United Kingdom. And the history of all... Just one second, this really matters. Yep. Why I'm getting irritated with you. The entire history of human progress since the Industrial Revolution depends on cheap energy. We are inflicting a complete reversal of the means of progress. And this notion that there is a green nirvana is not
all right,
true. David, I don't want to irritate you. I never want to irritate you, but I do want you to be aware that renewables are the future, and this is a hill that I'm happy to die on. We're going to run out of fossil fuels. He wishes I would die on the hill.
May I offer you a Calvary?
That was a short, sharp relationship we had.
May I offer you a Calvary? I would be very happy.
Because do you think we're just going to have fossil fuels and we're just going to rely on that?
I think that we will rely on...
No energy security, no new green jobs.
Sorry, there would be plenty of energy security if we exploited, like fracking, if we exploited the North Sea.
Fracking has about 6 months of energy under our feet.
No, it doesn't.
Well, how come most of the scientists who look at fracking...
we've got decades of fracking.
Decades. 10 decades isn't enough.
Of course, that is nonsense. Fracking has got 6 months of energy under our feet. Do you think that the fracking companies who are doing all this at their own expense, the exploration and so on, do you think they do that for just 6 months' supply? Don't forget, they'd be doing it at their own expense, unlike all this which is being done at your expense. And they have to go into the market and supply the fuel to you. And we could put restrictions. We could say the gas in Britain has to be limited, first of all, to Britain and so on, and only past a certain point exported. We could do all sorts of things. But to make a claim that is ridiculous like that, because she doesn't live in the real world. I just find this programme incredible, and I was so grateful for the common sense coming from Starkey on this. So grateful.
What's going to continue on forever and ever and ever? Renewables. Renewables are the future. It's an opportunity for another industrial revolution.
Well, we're going to allow Amy to have the last word on that, but thank you very much to my brilliant panel. And David certainly lived up to his billing as cantankerous this evening.
Well, if you made it to the end of this video, thank you for watching. It's been a long video. I'm just frustrated at the world around me at the moment. I could obviously, on each point I've been making in this video, go on for hours about each subject. But believe me, the entire thing now is based on a false premise. The science is now gone. You see, science without debate and open debate and criticism isn't science. And the perfect example of this is the James Webb Telescope, which has now revealed and questioned even the Big Bang. It's also revealed how can we have galaxies that we're measuring to be older than the universe itself before the Big Bang. So there's all sorts of questions now in that scientific community, astrophysics, and rightfully so. I think a lot of people are excited about it because everything is, well, they've got certain things wrong, all of them. And that was a sort of consensus, although there's no such thing in science. There's always debate, this or that, and you gradually evolve. That's how it works. But science today is not science. Science is not taught in universities in many areas. The closer you get to politics, the less science it is. And climate, the change is not a science, nor are these scientists practicing it. because they refuse to debate even. They say it's settled. That is not how science works. And what they've done to our children, the education of our children, and to science itself is despicable. And with that, I'll end this long video.